So today we are going to talk about, so this course is about a gentle introduction to large language models. So I broadly work in this area of natural language processing, which is the science and engineering of building models that can handle human languages, right? So this includes tasks like being able to classify a sentence into positive sentiment or negative sentiment. So let's say you want to go watch a movie, there are lots of reviews, you want to know whether it's a positive recommendation or a negative recommendation. What is the sentiment of the reviewers? Yeah, so let's resume. I was broadly talking about what natural language processing is. It's science and engineering of building models that can handle human text. You are accustomed or you've seen a lot of these applications already in your day-to-day life, probably without even noticing or realizing. So let's say when you're completing an email or responding to a friend using WhatsApp, it starts to suggest the next options. Or when you're, let's say, searching online, it gives you answers directly, like how many times did India win the World Cup? You can directly get the answer. This is again an NLP application. Similarly, you have seen and talked to Siri, Alexa, and all of the speech recognition processing, everything falls within NLP broadly. And of course, like you have used GPT at some point of time or ChatGPT at some point of time. Like there are several use cases, be it summarization, writing content, answering your homework questions, creative content, like generating ads, coming up with clever titles, question answering, problem solving to some degree, and so many more use cases. So a lot of these are NLP applications that we will try to uncover as a part of this short course. So let me begin by sharing why language understanding is critical, right? We use language as a means to communicate. That's how we share thoughts with other people. That's how we share our intentions, our desires. Majority of the data out there is textual in nature. So if you're working for a company, you probably realize this already. A lot of content is in textual format. So if you want to make sense of the available data, you need NLP tools to crunch that data. And another reason why we should focus on understanding language is it's a key component of intelligence, right? If we are going to build intelligent machines, we ideally want them to be able to communicate with us in our own languages. So understanding language is a critical key component of intelligence. At the same time, handling human languages is hard. Words can mean very different things in different languages, different cultures. Anybody here wants to give me an example of how one word means very different things in different cultures? Anybody? So for instance, the word bill, right, in India means like a receipt or how much you're supposed to pay. If you go to a restaurant, you ask for a bill and maybe you can pay that with a check if you want. Whereas if you are in the US or in the West, a bill is a currency note. So you, like a dollar bill, right? So in US, you would ask for the check, which means the receipt, and you will pay through the bill. Whereas in India, you will ask for the bill and pay through the check. So different words can mean very different things in different contexts and cultures. Similarly, let's say the word sincere here might mean dedicated, whereas sincere in other places means genuine. So different words have different connotations, even across cultures. This is within the same language itself, so I'm not even moving languages. Similarly, like understanding language requires us to have common sense. Olive oil is made of olives, peanut oil is made of peanuts, palm oil is made of palms. You cannot hope that baby oil is made of babies, right? I mean, you all get this very easily. But if I show machines these three examples, it's gonna assume that baby oil is made of babies. So it requires us to really have common sense, have interacted with the world and so on. Languages are also highly compositional. You can create new sentences on the fly. So can anyone here, let's say, give me what is the longest sentence they have heard? Assuming you gave me that longest sentence, I can tell that, hey, Mansi gave me this longest sentence, and by virtue I have a longer sentence than Mansi, right? So you can create infinitely novel sentences just by imagination. Let's say you saw a pink elephant wearing a sherwani in a jungle at night on 3rd of March in 2022 near Bangalore in India when PM Modi was around with his associates. Like, you can keep adding these clauses, right? So you can create infinitely novel sentences on the fly. Languages are highly compositional. They are designed to communicate thoughts flexibly. So this is one feature of languages, right? But that also means if we are going to analyze languages by computers or using computers, it's a tough task because there are infinitely novel sentences that you have to deal with. And there are also some interesting properties of human languages. Like, for instance, roughly word frequencies follow a Zipf's law. What does that mean? So it means that, let's say, frequency of a word is inversely proportional to the rank of that word if I was to sort the words by their frequencies. Okay? So let's say if I were to analyze all the English content, which one do you think is the most frequent word? The? Okay, great. The is the right answer. So the is roughly 7% of, let's say, the corpus I am analyzing. What is the next word? Turns out the next word is off. What do you think is the frequency of this? 5%? 2.5? What does this law say? Frequency of the word is inversely proportional to the rank. So the rank of this word in descending order is 1. This is 2. So this is roughly 3.5%. Right? The next word will have roughly 1/3 of 7%. And so on. So you have a distribution that looks a bit like this, right? Half of this, 1/3 of this, so on. What that means is that there are lots and lots of words that occur very rarely because it's inversely proportional to the rank. So there's a large amount of tail words that don't occur as much, but we do need to understand them to be able to really understand language. And people who have started to learn languages after, let's say, age of 10 would, I think, painfully realize this, right? There are just too many words in a new language, and yeah. Okay, so word frequencies follow a power law, a Zipf's law to be specific, which is this, which makes us realize that there are a lot of words that don't occur that much, but we still need to understand them to really handle human languages. And also there is a okay, question, yeah?
So does this law, like, is it applicable only to English or like?
Yeah, it's applicable to many human languages. It's a, I mean, it's a power law, but it's like, it's not like it will always happen for all the corpus in exactly this way. Like, this is approximately true. Yeah?
Because in Hindi we don't see a word like the.
Yeah. So whatever word is the most frequent word in Hindi, the second word will be roughly half the frequency of the first word. That's what this law says, right? Okay. Awesome. So there is also a lot of ambiguity in languages. There's semantic ambiguity, syntactic ambiguity. So let's say if I were to say the trophy did not fit the suitcase because it was too small. What is it here? Suitcase, right? Trophy did not fit the suitcase because it was too small. Suitcase was too small, right? Okay. Now if I was to say the trophy did not fit the suitcase because it was too big. So we're talking about trophy now, right? So there can be a lot of semantic ambiguity which only, let's say, you having world knowledge, common sense are able to reference it correctly to either trophy or the suitcase, depending upon whether the word is small or big. Yes, question?
So but if NLP aligns with the grammar, right? So then most of these ambiguities can be resolved, right? So because in which grammar says it should be associated with the latest noun.
Yes, yes.
Right. So no matter what that big is, it will always be associated.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So if I were to parse this sentence according to a particular grammar, there are oftentimes multiple possible parses that are applicable, and depending upon which parse I end up with, these could be two different interpretations. So parsing also can be probabilistic. So in fact, a lot of languages are probabilistically context-free languages, PCFGs, or probabilistic context-free grammars. They're created through PCFGs. Which basically allow for this probabilistic parsing, that in some cases this would be the right parse for this sentence, in other cases this could be the right parse. Similarly, if you look at the second sentence, a computer that understands you like your mother, what does this mean? There are multiple meanings of this, right? What is maybe the most obvious one? Anybody? Yeah? Yeah? What comes to your mind when you see this sentence?
Computer that can understand emotions.
Okay. A computer that understands you like your mother, which means, like, let's say your mother understands you, so a computer also understands you like your mother does, right? So this is maybe the very first thing that comes to mind, that a computer is able to understand you like your mother understands you.
Basically, it will do without saying anything.
Yeah, like you guys are thinking of second order, third order implications of this. I'm talking about, in a very literal sense, what this means. So one interpretation is correct, that it means the computer understands you just as well like your mother does. The other interpretation could be that a computer understands the fact that you like your mother, right? It is quite natural or quite likely that you like your mother as a person, and a computer knows that fact, right? A computer understands that you like your mother.
If you put a comma in it.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to add commas, add quotes, you could have resolved this ambiguity. But this sentence could have been parsed in multiple ways. So there is syntactic ambiguity that often is present in many ambiguous sentences. Of course, there are multiple ways to make this less ambiguous. Okay. So lastly, words and their meanings also change and evolve over time. So new words are introduced. We didn't know much about COVID until 2019, 2020. Words also go out of fashion. Right? Words take different meanings over time. So there are these words like master and mistress, buddy and sissy, bachelor and spinster, doctor and doctress. At some point, a few centuries ago perhaps, they meant very similar things. But now the feminine version of it is considered derogatory. So it has taken a very negative connotation, like you would use mistress as a negative word, oh, his mistress, right? But master is still positive. Whereas, like, if you have a really cool friend, you'll call him buddy, right? But sissy has a negative connotation at this point of time. So this is all part of how languages evolve with us or with our cultures. So the same word could take different meanings over time, right? So these are some of the challenges why handling languages is quite hard, and some of this we will try to cover as a part of this course. But hopefully this motivates enough that this is not a cakewalk. We need to develop smarter models to be able to handle some of these kinds of things. Okay, so roughly to give you what we are going to cover in this course is largely focused on LLMs or large language models, or primarily language models. That used to be a small component of many NLP courses. Over time it has gained prominence, partly because these models have now been repurposed to do a whole bunch of other NLP tasks. So for instance, you these days do sentiment analysis also using a large language model, like let's say ChatGPT. You do question answering also using a large language model. This was not the case, let's say in 2010, right? So language modeling was a small subset of NLP problems that people cared about. Right now, it is one of the major thrusts of a lot of people who associate with this area. Okay, so this is, remember, a short course, a gentle introduction. So we won't be able to cover everything, but we'll try to cover n-gram language models, some bit of neural networks, recurrent neural networks, and then build towards transformers, which are the most popularly used architectures as of today. Then we look at how do we pre-train transformers, which is what gives us GPT or ChatGPT, and then we'll towards the very end look at how we make it safe and align it to human values. So that component is called post-training. Okay. By the way, how are we? Are people on YouTube able to hear? And okay, perfect. So great. Any questions so far before we really dig deep? I also want to share what this course is not. This course is not going to be about mathematical derivation, proofs, bounds. Like the nature of the subject is such that it is highly empirical in nature. We often talk about what works in practice. Our understanding, by R as in the field itself, does not really fully understand why systems are working the way they are. Theoretically, we don't have a lot of theoretical understanding of, let's say, transformer models or ChatGPT and so on. But at the same time, we also know a fair bit of like what works in practice, because we've conducted a lot of experiments, so we know what works in practice. And because it's a gentle introduction and maybe people come from various backgrounds, so we will prioritize intuition over mathematical rigor. And my personal objective for this course is that it will lower the barrier for you to know more about large language models and maybe use them for your purposes and be more aware about it. And if you want to dive deeper and do a more rigorous course or do something that involves a lot of programming, this course will lower that barrier for you more seriously get into this topic. Okay. So yeah, any questions before we go into the content?
So you are saying that theoretically it's limited, so in the course it is limited? Or
Yeah, like in general it is limited, so in the course also it's limited, partly because of that, but partly also because we have 5 lectures and a diverse cohort.
Hope you will be comparing with the local Indic Bharatiya Bhashas, wherever context.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, like what is different between large language models and normal, what we see in C language?
So, okay, so what is the difference between large language models and C language?
No, not C language, normal computer, high level.
Okay, like Python? So large language model is a neural network which is quite different from, let's say, a programming language, and that will become very clear. Programming language allows you to, let's say, program stuff, specify instructions that you want people or you want machines to execute on your behalf. A large language model is something else altogether, which hopefully this course will go in detail about.
Will you touch upon topics like statistical models, ML models, real models, and dense logic?
Yeah, so I will talk a lot about statistical models like n-gram models today, deep learning also today and in the next weekend. What was the last point?
If you touch upon CNNs and then...
So I'll cover some architectures including feed-forward networks, RNNs and transformers, not CNNs, but you can pick it up if you feel comfortable. Yeah.
You also refer to some of the courses which we can do for going.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll share a list of references that you can check out. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay. So just a primer on some important distributions and what we call as their MLE estimates. So you might have seen this at some point, surely. like a Bernoulli variable, like let's say we say a Bernoulli variable with the parameter p, or it could be theta. What does this mean? Could also be theta, by the way, like p could be theta anyway. So like Bernoulli is a distribution, very simple distribution that says if I were to toss a coin, what is the chance that it will land up heads, right? So let's say p is the probability that a coin lands heads. Okay, so the top of the coin is heads. And now let's say you sampled using a Bernoulli distribution 10 times, and you saw heads, heads, tails, heads, 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 tails, 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 heads, right? So let's say you saw 7 heads, right? Okay, I need to erase tails. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Let's say this is all the cases where Rohit Sharma said tails. He hasn't been having great luck in tosses. I hope he does better tomorrow. So let's say this is what you observe. Okay, so you observe 7 heads, 3 tails. Can you say anything about what p might be?
0.7.
So it feels like p might be 0.7. Can p be 0?
Can be.
Yes? No?
No.
P cannot be 0, right? If p was 0, I would have never seen a heads, right? Can p be 1?
No.
No. Okay, perfect. If p was 1, I would have never seen a tails, right? I would have always seen a heads. So, but p can be, let's say, 0.5. Can p be 0.5?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, perfect. So, what I want to do essentially is I want to figure out what is the probability of this sequence given p, right? So depending upon different values of p, this sequence will either be impossible or likely with different values, right? So if p was 0, this small p, then I know for a fact that this sequence is impossible to get, so that this probability will be 0, right? So I am essentially asking what is the likelihood of observing this data for different values of p, right? So if p was 0.5, right? So then I can say this probability is 0.5 times 7, 0.3 times, 0.5 times 3, right? 7 heads and 3 tails, or I could say 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5 into 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, so 0.5 power 10, right? So depending upon different values of p, this particular function will either be less likely or more likely, right? So depending upon this unknown value, your data could have a higher likelihood or a lower likelihood. Essentially, you are asking which value of p maximizes the chances of observing this. You have already gained some observations. You already watched the last 10 cricket matches. You saw what the H and T's are, and now you want to tell Rohit Sharma what to call tomorrow, right? So you are trying to, you have a great suspicion that this coin is not balanced. So P might not be 0.5, P might be something else. So you are just trying to get an estimate of what P is that maximizes this likelihood the best, right? So if I were to write this like in a bit more abstract form, I would say that this is equal to P to the power 7, 1 minus P to the power 3. So this is corresponding to 7 heads. This is corresponding to 3 tails. By the way, why am I able to multiply these? Independence, right? One coin toss is independent from other coin toss. These are sampled independently. Great. Now, can you tell me what value of P will maximize this, or how will you compute that value? Okay, yeah, great. So this is a function of p, very simple. You can always differentiate it. You can also take a log of this function and then differentiate it. A log is also monotonically increasing, so you can differentiate the log and find the p. Anyway, but you can do the derivation, you can compute p that maximizes this, right? And your guess was right. That is 0.7 or 7 upon 10. If I were to plot this graph, this is p equal to 0.7, which maximizes the likelihood of observing this data. P equal to 0.5 could also have happened, just that chances are a bit lower. P equal to 0 can never happen, P equal to 1 can never happen, right? So depending upon different values of P, the likelihood of observing data might change, and you are interested in finding the P that maximizes the likelihood, right? This estimate is also called as an MLE estimate, maximum likelihood estimate, right? So this is something you might have done at some point, but we'll use this over and over again in the class, so I thought I'll introduce it. So you are aware of Bernoulli, you might also be aware of categorical distributions. They are just simple extensions of Bernoulli. So instead of rolling a coin, you roll a dice. Just one second. So dice could potentially take values between, let's say, 1, 2, 2, 6. Right? And now if you were to roll this 100 times and you observe that for 50 times you find a 1, for 20 times you find a 2, and so on, right? Again, you will suspect that this is not a balanced die. Like if it was a balanced die, it's very unlikely to observe 50 times 1. Could happen, but just very unlikely. So if you compute the MLE estimate of observing 1, you will say that the probability of observing 1, or the probability of the die giving you 1, is 1 upon 2, 50 upon 100. This is the, again, like it could be 0.4, it could be 0.6, but this is the estimate that maximizes the data that I have, maximizes the likelihood of the data that I have, right? Questions? Yeah.
On the previous slide, if you had only one occurrence, can you say something about the small?
No, so one again, like your estimates would become better if you have more occurrences, obviously. Yeah, with one occurrence, you either land a heads or a tails, so you will be tempted to conclude that it is a fully biased coin, either always gives heads or always gives tails. But again, if you observe more data, your estimates would be better. Okay. Any more questions? So you're getting a feel for how MLE estimates work, right? Yeah.
The previous slide, so the distributions may change as the sequence is being.
Yeah. Yes, yes.
So how to capture that?
Yeah, so it might happen that if you observe next 10 matches, there are only 6 heads. And if you just had that sequence, you would be tempted to conclude 0.6. Similarly, like one idea is like if you have lots of data, aggregate all the data and use all the data to estimate your MLE, which is what is typically done or makes sense, right? So, or you should be willing to update if your data has changed. Let's say distributions have changed, maybe they brought in a new coin, all that can happen.
No, but you always consider it is going to be a biased coin only. Because
Yeah.
in coin choices, there can be, if it's a free coin, it can be anything, right? You cannot really associate with the previous results that have happened. If the coin is not biased, in the sense that whatever data that has come.
Yeah. So that's good point. Like there are ways to actually have a prior belief that this is an unbiased coin. So unless there is a lot of evidence, I'm willing to believe that it is 0.5 heads, tails. And I will change my belief only when we see more data. So if you see 1,000 tosses and you observe that 700 are heads, then maybe you are okay in updating your belief. So those are called map estimates, which are slightly different from MLE estimates. You can look them up, where you can also account for a prior belief that you have, like it's an unbiased coin. But here it could be an unbiased coin or biased coin. We will just compute the MLE. based on the data we have. Okay, cool. So let's talk about language models, and I'll connect how MLE estimates are useful for language models. So first of all, everybody's talking about language models. So what are language models? Language models are just nothing but machines that can compute probability of sequence of words. So you throw in a sequence of words to, let's say, a black box, it will give you a probability of how likely is that sequence, right? How likely is that sequence to, let's say, have been written by a human being. So if I give you lots of these sequences, 1, 2, 3, 4, assignments working, we are working on our assignments, we assignments working are on our. So you might come to realize that this particular sequence looks like one that might have been written by a human being. So this should get ideally a higher probability than, let's say, the other sequences, right? This is roughly the functionality that is desired here. Language models are models that give you probabilities of sequence of words, right? So you put in sequence of words, you can put in gibberish like blah 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 blah. It will give you the probability of that, right?
Basically, all of these have some probability.
Yes,
Like each word
yes. So these three will also have some probabilities, but very low probabilities. Okay. So ideally we want to get to a machine that can help us do this. So that's basically like a very simple definition of what a language model is. Okay. So if we had this machine, we can obviously use it for a whole lot of things, right? So let's say if I had this sentence and this sentence, let's say someone said that these are all the possible candidates that could be corrections for this sentence. I know that the first one should be less likely, the second one should be more likely. If my language model is trained appropriately, and if it's a good language model, which means it assigns higher probabilities to things that people actually write, then the second one will have a higher probability, and I can use a component of the large language model to say that, yeah, the second one looks spelling wise more correct than the first one. So it has applications in spelling correction. Similarly, if I were to give you an audio signal and I said recognizing speech or wrecking a bitch, it could be that, like, just based on that signal, I could have been saying wrecking a beach or recognizing speech. They're somewhat similar, but because I have a language model, I can say that this thing is a lot more likely than saying wrecking a beach. So it's also used for ASR, automatic speech recognition. So if you have a speech signal that you are trying to convert into language, and let's say you have multiple options, a language model can help you there, right? It can tell you that this seems like a more likely option. Similarly, let's say you have a translation model that gives you a few options like main wahan gaya. It could be translated, let's say, word to word by some model, or that could be a potential candidate like I there went or I went there. A language model will tell you that this is a lot more likely, right? This is more likely because this is how we write. If a language model is appropriately trained and appropriately built, it will give us more likelihood to the first sequence than the second sequence. So you can use this for translation if you have multiple possible translations of the same Hindi sentence, right? So there are lots of applications of language models, and in fact speech recognition was one of the first few applications of why there was an interest in language models to begin with. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to develop these language models. That's, I think, of great interest to everybody. So one way to develop a model is to think about the generative story. So these are also popular things, like when you think of a generative story, you think of a distribution, let's say a God-given distribution. You have some way that the language magically appeared in front of you, a way to have arrived at that generation, right? So that's what is called as a generative story. So you think about the data generating process, right? So you want to ideally estimate P of X, and let's say this is a sequence of words from 1 to T, right? You want to estimate probability of this sequence. So let's wear our generative modeling hat and think about how this data could have arrived. So let's say you go to Wikipedia, you see a lot of data. Some human beings wrote it. There was some process in their minds that led them to write it. And there's a lot of factors as to why they were writing what they were writing. Maybe they were frustrated, maybe they had tea, maybe they did not like their wife or husbands, whatever. There's a lot of complication going around to figure out how that data came into existence. But we won't be able to model all of that, right? Obviously, that's just way too complex. So let's think of very, very simple, trivial ways of generating that data, or what is the generative story behind that data coming into existence. So one idea is let's use a categorical variable. Let's use a dice. So instead of generating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, let's say I have a dice which has all the vocabulary words. So dice is a huge dice. Let's say it has 10,000 sides. It will look very weird. You might have never seen a dice that has 10,000 sides, but let's imagine it has 10,000 sides. And not every side is equally likely. Let's say the is more often present, or the word off is a lot more likely than the. So it's a loaded die of 10,000 sides, right? Many of them are words that we see in English. And there are two special tokens, let's call them start token and stop token, just for convenience, just so that we know we have to start or stop, right? So one very simple way is, I will artificially say that I have generated start. I will keep rolling this die. Let's say I get the, magically. There's a 7% chance, let's say I might get the. I landed with the, okay. Then I rolled the dice again, I landed with shirt, let's say. Let's say I rolled the dice again and I landed with pencil. I rolled the dice one more time and let's say I landed up with the word the again, or off again. So this could happen. It's a very, very simple model of generating language, or thinking about how the language might have come into existence. It's a very stupid model, to be honest, right? Nobody writes like this. Nobody has a die like that they throw around and generate language. So it's a very, very simplistic model of how language could have been written. So this is why we were talking about this categorical variable. This is now a dice with vocabulary number of sides, with this randomly, independently, word by word, until you land with this dice that has a stop word on the top, right? This is a very, very artificial way of thinking about data generation, but you would have that thought, right? So according to that model, you would say that, okay, I am sampling every word, or I'm generating every word independently. So word 1 has nothing to do with word 2. It's just, word 2 is a different run or a throw of a die. Similarly, word 3 is a different throw of the die, and so on, right? So you could potentially, you have essentially, because of this data generation process, you have assumed independence. You have assumed that word 4 is independent of word 3, word 3 is independent of word 2, and word 2 is independent of word 1. And there's also no ordering in place, you don't care about this is the first word or this is the 7th word. You just have one dice and you're exploiting that to just play around and generate language, right? So if I were to use this generative story and generate language like this, this would be my decomposition. This is the joint probability of the sequence of tokens, which I can now write down very simply as probability of individual terms according to this generative story, and it's a big assumption, right? This is not how languages are actually written. This is not how humans write. This is a very naive, simple model. It's called the unigram model, because you're only thinking of one word at a time. You're not modeling the context. In language, context is key, but we are not modeling that here, right? So now if I were to assume that all my data came from this particular generative model, and this is the story that, let's say, I imagine and believe in, how will I estimate the parameters of this theta? So first of all, what is the size of this theta? Right? So this is of size vocabulary. Why? Because there are vocabulary number of sides of the die that I can land up with. This vocabulary includes, let's say, the start and stop tokens. Right? So it's no longer a 6-sided die, it's a vocabulary sided die. And I need to estimate all of these vocabulary number of parameters to tell you that, okay, how likely is the word the to come, how likely is the word of to come, is to come, Bangalore to come, and so on, right? So in this particular vector is a scalar for, let's say, Bangalore, right? Which will tell me how often is this particular word going to come. What will be the MLE estimate of this word? Anybody? So taking log and differentiation, sure, but if I threw a dice 100 times and one came 50 times, what was the MLE estimate of that? Half, 50 upon 100. So if I observe a lot of text according to this model or believing in this model, and I see Bangalore coming hundreds of times, like 100 times, out of total words, then this is going to be my estimate, which is nothing but very, very simple, right? Like, you don't have any other means to guess, so you're just saying, okay, I observed 1,000,000 words, of which 100 of them were Bangalore or Bangalore. So looks like the probability or the MLE estimate of theta Bangalore is count of Bangalore upon total words that I've observed. So this is nothing but an MLE estimate. So just like the dice example, just like the coin cost example, based on the data that I've observed, this particular value of theta Bangalore will maximize the likelihood of the data that I've observed, assuming this generative story. Is that clear? Any questions about it? Again, it's a very, very simplistic model. You might not believe in this model. It's a very naive model. It assumes words are independent of each other. The order does not matter. But at least mathematically, are you able to relate that this categorical dice that you have, which has loaded sides, you have to estimate how likely is it to land on Bangalore. Your maximum likelihood estimate is going to say that how many times you have observed Bangalore upon total number of words that you have observed, right?
So the accuracy of unigram model will increase if we are increasing number of estimates.
Number of estimates. So the question is, what will happen to the accuracy if we increase the number of estimates? So here the total number of estimates are vocabulary number. So yes, the accuracy will be a function of vocabulary. If you have only 2 vocabulary items, then you can only generate those 2 words. You cannot generate a rich language. So accuracy will of course matter with the size of the vocabulary. Similarly, if you have a very large vocabulary, you are unnecessarily carrying a large number of parameters for which maybe you don't even have a lot of observations. Right? Okay. So this is very simple. It's a unigram model. It assumes everything is independent. Let's look at a slightly better story. So this looks like a very fake story. No serious person will ever believe it. This is probably not how data is generated. Let's look at the generative story of the bigram model. It says, again, let's start with the symbol start. Now, instead of having one dice, I have a vocabulary number of dice, right? So there are lots and lots of dice, and since the first word is start by definition, and because I have to start, I will go in the storeroom and get that dice. I will roll it. And let's say I saw the word the coming after the word start. I will marvel at this and, oh, this is the, let me go back to the store again, get the die which has the word the on it. That is the die corresponding to the word the. Now I will sample that dice. Okay? And it says, let's say office. Like it, you tossed that die, and let's say it landed on the word office. You will go back to the storeroom and figure out which die corresponds to office. You will bring it back and you will toss it again. Maybe the word comes is, right? You will go to the storeroom, get the is die and toss it again. Maybe the word that comes out is, say, the office is closed, right? So this is like, again, a very, very simplistic model. But it is at least contextual. It is based on the last word, right? It generates output that is aware of the last word. So
Only the last word?
only the last word right now, which is why this model is called bigram model, because we are thinking two words at a time and this word is only conditioned on the last word. Question?
These dice do not need to have a vocabulary number of sides. Right?
They do have to have vocabulary number of sides. If you're going to generate a vocabulary number of outputs, right, like it will have to have those number of sides.
So, but then let's say the first word was Bengaluru, and then the die that you have next, like the die that which is titled Bengaluru, would not probably have Russia next to it.
Yeah. So it could happen that the first word was Bengaluru, right? You know, because you have read so much, that it's very unlikely to say Bengaluru, Russia. So, but it is maybe in some contexts that could be possible. I visited Bengaluru, Russia and Japan. Could happen, right? It's not absolutely crazy. I agree it will be a very, very small probability. So that Bengaluru dice will have Russia, but that edge will have a very, very small chance of coming on the top. It's a loaded dice. Not every word is equally likely to come on the top. Words that are unlikely to follow Bengaluru will have a very small probability. Question?
So you will have a vocabulary number of dice basically.
Yes, vocabulary number of dice, and each die has a vocabulary number of sides.
Now how do you perform the observation for each word in this course?
Yeah. So we will get there. One more slide away. Okay. So is the story clear, the generative story? Again, this is also a very fake story. Language is not written this way. I'm just trying to motivate how language could have possibly been generated by this model, and this may not look like terrible. Right? So whenever we're talking about generative models, we tend to think about generative stories of those models. Yeah?
So like you said that we have vocabulary number of dice and each dice will have a vocabulary number of sides. But
Yes.
in that case, the like each side will have different probabilities.
Yes,
as
yes,
we have,
yes,
we go,
yes,
different dice.
yes. So, so let's say if I have a Bangalore dice, maybe there is a very high chance that the next word could be traffic, right? Right, Bangalore traffic. Whereas maybe Japan traffic might be less likely. So based on different dice, sides will have different probabilities, right? Okay. So as per this model, what I'm saying is, this is the decomposition, right? So this is, let's say, the start word. Probability of this word is conditioned on this. probability of word 3 is conditioned on word 2, probability of word T is conditioned on the previous word. Again, is this always true? No. This is a simplifying assumption that the word that I am generating now is only dependent on the word that I have generated previously. According to this assumption, I can decompose this joint probability term into saying that let me generate the first word, and then based on that word I will go to the store and get that die and generate the next word, and then generate the next word, and so on.
So here first word will be like given the start word, right?
Yeah. So technically you're right. So what we typically will do is we will artificially add start and artificially add stop. Alright, so this term will actually be P of W1 given start. Yeah.
You give some value to the start or
Yeah. So how are these probabilities estimated? You have a lot of data that is lying, that you have access to, which is what you are trying to use to learn the parameters of this model. So again, go back to the example of 7 heads and 3 tails. You want to understand what is the likely chance, what is the estimate of P, like what is the value of P that would have maximized this observation. Similarly here you have lots of data available, textual data given to you, and you want to estimate some parameters like probability of the word traffic given Bangalore, right? If it's a representative corpus, then I bet this value will be high, right? Right? So you are estimating terms like this, traffic given Bangalore. So what will be the estimate of this? What will be the MLE estimate of this? So I will count how often does the word Bangalore traffic come together. Yes.
Given Bangalore.
Given the word Bangalore. Perfect. Of all possible words that could come after Bangalore, I am trying to look at how often does the word traffic come.
Should we put divided by count Bangalore dash? What if a sentence ended at Bangalore?
So, what if a sentence ended at Bangalore?
So you don't take those cases in the denominator.
So we don't have to. So stop. So you're thinking of this period as a special word. Think of this as just any other word. Think of comma as also another word. That's just a part of the vocabulary. Like you don't have to give special treatment to it. Just counting Bangalore traffic divided by Bangalore is enough.
Sir, how will we know when to stop? Because the sentence can always go.
Yeah, great. So there are typically in practice either you observe stop or you say that the length I is greater than, let's say, 100 if you want to generate only 100 word sentences. So there's typically an upper bound on how much you are willing to generate. So there's typically these two conditions. Okay. It might happen that stop never occurs out of chance, right? Good question here. Any more questions? So is this part clear? Like this is just nothing but an MLE estimate here. Similarly, if you want to say, let's say Cubbon Park, right? So how often does the word park come after the word Cubbon? You will check in your corpus the frequency of Cubbon Park divided by Cubbon, and that will tell you the probability of park coming after Cubbon. Of course, there can be other things like Cubbon Road or Cubbon Adventures, but maybe park is one of the most likely things to follow Cubbon. So that probability will be estimated to be quite high using a corpus, right? And once you have these estimates, you can of course write down the probability of an entire sequence. One second. Okay, so right, so that's the bigram model. It's conditioned on the past word. But you can start to observe, right? It all depends on the data you have. If you did not see Cubbon Park so often, but you saw Cubbon Road very often, maybe you were in a different city where there is a Cubbon Road. So you will generate text that is indicative of the data that you have, right? So this model will fit the data that you have. It will maximize the probability of the data that you have observed. Okay, so just to summarize, these are the three n-gram models, like a unigram model where you have a very simplistic assumption that is dependent on any words in the context, everything is independently generated. You can simplify and write this as a product of individual terms. The bigram model is this bigram story we were talking about, where the word that you have currently is conditioned on the word to the left. Like traffic is conditioned to the word on its left, let's say Bangalore. Similarly, trigram model is just one extension of unigram and bigram, where a word is conditioned on the past two words, right? So like when we say n-gram, we say it's conditioned on the past n words, let's say, right? So a 10-gram model will be conditioned on 10 words, right? A 4-gram model will be conditioned on 4 words.
Also a model where we will skip some words. We will only see some of the words at the beginning of a sentence.
Yeah.
Skip some words and then write.
Yeah, great question. So we'll come to that. Hold that question. Yeah. Okay. So how will we estimate these probabilities? We already wrote down these formulas, right? So if you're using a unigram model, you want to understand what is the probability of the word traffic. You will just count how often does the word traffic occur given n. Similarly, if you want to understand what is the probability of the word traffic given Bangalore, right, you will estimate, you will count number of times Bangalore traffic occurs divided by the number of times Bangalore occurs. One second. Similarly, if you were to say painful Bangalore traffic, you will count how many times painful Bangalore traffic occurs divided by how often painful Bangalore occurs, right? These are all statistical models just computed based on statistics of the data that you have. Yeah, you had a question?
So for this denominator thing, the count has to be already, the number of words has to be fixed, right?
This one, n? Yeah, so typically you will start with what we call as a corpus, right? So think of this as Wikipedia. You can, oh god. I grew up with in an age where there was spelling correction and that's quite apparent, right? So your corpus could be Wikipedia, your corpus could be internet. So this is just a sequence of words that are already given to you. So you can count how many words are given to you and that is your end, right? So just to give you some example, let's say OpenAI GPT models are trained on trillions of words or tokens, right? So if there are 1 billion people, imagine everybody wrote 1,000 words.
Start from unigram, go to bigram, go to bigram.
Not necessary. You could just say I'm going to use a trigram model and these are just simple.
When you're only generating the first word.
Yeah. So that time so for trigram models you will have 2 start words. Start. Just for notational convenience.
But what if you think of n-grams?
Yeah, let's say, so basically if you have a 10-gram model, the first word will not be conditioned on anything, second word will be conditioned on the first word, 10th word will be conditioned on the first 9 words. but the 20th word will be only conditioned on the previous 10 words, not all the way till the first word. Okay?
We have to always put some number. We can't just say n and say everything previously and then keep generating.
Okay. So you're saying can n be infinite in some sense? Yes. So we will build models where this n can be very, very large. Yes. Your question?
So we reached a trigram, but let's say there were 10 gram.
Yeah.
And then for a given sequence of 10 words, we in the training data we didn't have enough. We didn't have even a single occurrence of 10 words together. How do you then get the probability?
Yeah. So great questions. You're jumping a few slides ahead. We'll come to you. Okay. So hold that question. That will be answered. Okay. So how does, like, if I were to actually do this, again, these were fake stories that I've been telling you all this while. But let's say if I were to believe in my stories and actually generate data as per a model trained, let's say I computed all those values using content that Shakespeare has given us, right? And a 1 gram model trained on Shakespearean data, when used to generate new data, will look like this, right? So this 1 gram looks crazy, right? There is rarely any grammar, to him swallowed, confess, hair both, which it doesn't really make much sense because it doesn't think about the previous word, previous words. There's no way it can capture grammar and anything like that, right? It's quite random. But it at least has popular words coming up, right? Like off, on, are, to, him.
It does look Shakespeare.
It does look Shakespeare, thank you. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I mean, there are definitely things like Shakespeare, right? Like where, like there's like maybe die somewhere, yeah, here, right? So if we go to 2 gram models, right? This starts to feel a little bit better, but like he's trim, captain, then all sorts. Okay, let's look at the 4 gram model where it's looking at 4 previous words to generate. I will go seek the traitor, right? King Henry, what? Some of the watch, a great banquet served in, right? So this is starting to look like some semblance of language that Shakespeare wrote. I mean, of course, I would be offending him and his like fans if I were to say that this is like really good, but this is like, again, just believing these fake, simple, naive models, you are able to generate something that resembles Shakespeare, right?
So, if I increase the n, let's say from 5,000 to 8,000, then after a point I may not be able to observe the improvement in the structure of the sentence.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Are we going to see some kind of a...
So you mean like increase n grams or increase vocabulary?
Increase the n grams.
Okay. So we'll come to the case where what happens if we increase n to a very large value. We'll hold that question. We'll come to it. So a little bit about Shakespeare's work. Shakespeare in total wrote close to 800,000 words, right? So he was very productive, and he had a very nice vocabulary. A typical vocabulary is roughly 20,000 of an intelligent person. Shakespeare was like Shashi Tharoor of their time, right? So a much higher vocabulary, right? But also note that the total number of unique bigrams that were generated by Shakespeare were only 300,000, right? Because not every pair of words makes sense, right? Like Bangalore iPad makes no sense, right? There is nothing like Bangalore iPad or Bangalore mic. So some of those words will never occur. So there is a lot of sparsity. So in principle, there is a possibility of V cross V bigrams, right? There is a vocabulary that Shakespeare used. If all possible bigrams were permissible, you could have 844 million of them. But the actual number of bigrams that Shakespeare used were only 300,000, right? So 99.9% of all possible bigrams were never seen. So there is a lot of sparsity as you go from a smaller end to a larger end. So the sparsity for 4 grams is even more, right? So whenever you have something like, let's say, I will go, or let's say go seek the, if these are the last 3 or 4 words, then there is a very high chance that there is maybe only one possible completion as per Shakespeare, right? Because of the sparsity, right? So whatever you probably see here are these exact matches in Shakespearean text. So whatever looks like Shakespeare is likely coming from Shakespeare. So all these 4 grams are very, very likely to have actually occurred in his text, right? So one last thing before we take a break is, again, this is maybe absolutely obvious to you, but again an important point to keep in mind. If you train on a slightly different corpus, the same fake stories I was telling you, like Wall Street Journal, this is all about news, business, stocks, the text will look very, very different. It's no longer Shakespeare, no longer killing, no longer traitors. We're talking about stock exchanges, years, foreign, 90 points, billions. So just based on the data that we have, our generations might look very different. Our vocabulary also might change. So this matters a lot. So we were looking at how just by changing the data that we use to estimate probabilities, the language that is sampled from those parameters could look wildly different. So this is generations from an n-gram model that was trained on Wall Street Journal, which is a news-like corpus full of, let's say, stock related, financial related news. And this is already visible in the generations like $99.6 billion, 204, 6%. So whatever you train on is going to reflect in your generations, basically. Okay, so a lot of people...
Here, have we used the full stop also as a word?
Yeah, full stop, comma, semicolon, exclamation mark are just like any other vocabulary items. Think of them as just a regular word. Yeah. Okay, so now let's look at a few more examples just to understand what are the issues that arise when we move to higher n-grams. So let's say we want to estimate the probability of please close the door. So for a bigram model, you will just count, let's say you want to understand probability of door given the, so you look at, let's say, how often this word the door occurs, which is the numerator here, right? And then you look at how many times is the word the followed by any other word, right? So this is count of the door divided by count of the, and this happens to be, let's say, 0.06%, right? So a small value. Right. Similarly, you could go to a trigram model. Now you will look at close the, right? And now just because you have closed the, there is more context available. There are only a few things you can close. You can close the window, you can close the gap, close the deal, close the thread. And it so happens that door is the second best option here. Roughly 5% chance that you will complete the next word with the word door. So if you have closed the, door is the second best option. Window is the first best option with a little more than 5% chance. Right, so you can imagine that more context helps here. So the door by itself was not very likely, 0.06%, but this is 5% because close the, there are only few things you can close. So higher n-grams can give you more specific probabilities like close the door, whereas lower n-grams are more generic like the door and so on. So if you go to a new sentence, let's say close the first door on the left, right? So it or please close the first door on the left. So it turns out that please close the first, this sequence itself never occurs in, let's say, the Wall Street Journal, right? Even though to us it seems like, okay, this is something a human being could have said easily, but if we are going to work with, let's say, 4-gram or above models, right, there is a lot of sparsity. By sparsity I mean there are a lot of 4 grams, 5 grams that just never show up in text. So in principle, if you have a vocabulary number of items and if you are looking at 5 grams, then principally there are v to the power 5 different options, right? every combination of vocabulary times another vocabulary times another v to the power 5. But in practice, let's say if you observe 1,000,000 tokens, there are 1,000,000 5 grams, right? If you just traverse from left to right, of which the unique 5 grams might be even less than 1,000,000, right? So this value v to the power 5 is just way too high, and a lot of the possible combinations will just never occur in the text. So for instance, you will never say, please close the first red door, maybe, right? Even though it is something that you can imagine someone saying. These are this is what I mean by sparsity. There are many combinations of 5 grams that can principally come, but only a very small number of them actually are written down, right? So if we go from 4 gram to 2 grams, right? So on one hand we have very specific things like close the door or close the first door, but if we get more specific, there's a good chance that we might never encounter that phrase altogether. So it can be specific but sparse. Whereas on the other hand, in 2 grams, if you are looking at this 2 grams, you will only capture the last word. So you will end up with only very general idea or a very general probabilities, right? So think of this example. The door is 0.06%, but close the door is 5%, because there is more context, and given close the door is quite likely to come. Close the window is also quite likely to come, right? So more context means more specific, but also means you might end up with no matches because it's going to be very sparse. So a natural question to ask here is that can we get a mix of both? We might appreciate the fact that we are not hitting a lot of sparsity in the 2 gram situation, but we are hitting a lot of specificity in the 4 gram situation. Can we balance those? So one very naive idea is that, like, when you're computing a 3 gram model, take everything, like take lambda times the trigram probability, lambda 2 times the bigram probability, and lambda 3 times the unigram probability. So if you want to say painful Bangalore traffic, right? So this phrase will tell you how likely is traffic to come after painful Bangalore. This is only going to tell you how likely is traffic to come after Bangalore. This is only going to tell you how likely is traffic to come. So you are basically interpolating between unigram, bigram and trigram estimates or probabilities to get best of both worlds. So you are not hitting sparsity by just considering higher n-grams, and at the same time you are also capturing the specific phrases that occur when they occur, like close the door, using higher n-grams. So this is one way to use both. One question is like, how do you decide lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3? Any guesses?
Lambda 1 should be probably high because of the sparsity.
You test it and
Yeah, great suggestions. So one intuition is maybe I want to pay more attention to this because it captures more context. But the other idea was like, let's just figure out experimentally what's the best thing. Good idea. So what people do is typically they will take lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3, and because they want this to be a probability, they all sum to 1. So they will try multiple values, let's say 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, let's say 0.2, then this will automatically become 0.6, whatever. Like you can imagine all possible combinations of lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3 in some intervals. Like you can't try everything on a real scale, there are infinite values. So let's say you try 5 combinations of lambda 1, 5 combinations of lambda 2. Once you have a lambda 1, lambda 2, this one is almost fixed. So one idea is you try all the 25 combinations on a held out data set, whichever one works the best, just use that. So this technique is actually quite common in deep learning. It's called grid search. And these are not exactly parameters of your model, parameters were probabilities that you were estimating. So these are in deep learning parlance called as hyperparameters. You might have come across these, like what should be my step size, what should be my learning rate, and people just say it's a hyperparameter, which is just saying that I don't know what is the absolute best value to use here. Let's try a few reasonable options and see which one works the best. And I think you are also maybe starting to see the empirical nature of deep learning in the field in general. Yeah, question?
Why should lambda 1 and lambda 2, lambda 3 sum to 1?
Yeah, I mean, if all of them are, let's say 1, 1, 1, then these three all are values between 0 to 1, but adding these three could be more than 1. You still want this ideally to be a probability distribution, right? So that is maybe one reason why we want to do that. Yeah.
So can't we take the advantage of the sparsity in such a big size of vocabulary? Like if we have V5, we
Yeah.
know that it has to be sparse.
Yes.
So a lot of things we can actually
Prune out. Yeah.
We can actually search only in those.
Yeah. So I think like from a storage perspective, sparsity is not a bad problem to have. That just means we need to store less values, and there are interesting data structures that allow you to do that. Like tries allow you to do that, for instance. But let's say you want to say something that has never been said before, like please close the first door. That phrase never was written down, or was never a part of, let's say, Shakespearean text or Wall Street Journal. Because now this seems like a reasonable combination, but it's not there, you will assign a 0 probability to it. So because that particular phrase is 0, everything else will become 0. So let's say if you were using this in a story, please close the first door and then move right and then do this, just because of that phrase being 0, everything else will become 0. So you are saying that this entire story is impossible to occur. So we don't want that.
It's interesting that you got tries. Is this represented as a try?
Yeah. Higher n-grams are typically represented as tries. Tries is like one go-to data structure. Yeah, there could be others too. Yeah. I mean, I won't get into tries now. That's a separate topic altogether. But look it up. It's a data structure to store these kinds of sparse n-grams, right? There could be other data structures also. Yeah. So back in maybe 2005, 2007, 2010, the Google search that you see today for its auto-completion would use a 7 to 10 gram models with interpolation. So these are not just fantasy stories or fake stories I've been telling you. These are practical tools that were at least used close to 2 decades back. Right? Okay. So n-gram language models are not completely useless. They capture a lot of small interesting details. Like for instance, she is amazing. They are amazing, right? So it knows that is more likely to come after she than are. So it has some sense of English grammar, right? It knows that is more likely to come after she than probability of are, right? So by default it understands this. Similarly, a trigram model might, or a 4-gram model might be able to complete this, beat around the bush, right? So it somehow has some awareness of idioms or some pop culture like Nike, just do it, right? Or given how the news situation today is, it's very likely to fill this up with PM Modi, right? And like, so in some sense it knows who the Prime Minister of India is. It can complete the next word given this context. A trigram model will have a very high probability for probability of token Modi given Indian PM, right? So people generally ask, how does ChatGPT know who is India's Prime Minister? It's very simple actually, even a trigram model knows that, right? Okay. So the lots of things that a n-gram model cannot capture though, right? So for tennis class, he wanted to buy his own racket. For a programming class, he wanted to buy his own computer, right? So if I'm only looking at 4 or 5 words here, all of these are same in these two contexts, right? Wanted to buy his own. But only the word tennis or programming really tells you what this kid needs, right? Similarly, the word like bought and purchased are used interchangeably. So you bought a house, you purchased a house, you purchased a necklace. But for a n-gram model, these are just different tokens. So probability of what comes after bought a is completely differently managed than the probability of what comes after purchased a. Even though like we know that they are similar words, they mean similar things, we are just not able to share these context.
Like if you go for higher order engrams, then would we capture the long distance correlation?
Yeah. So if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 gram will capture that, yes. But for even the 8 gram model, it has to see exactly this phrase in exactly this order to be able to like get that right. So we can hope that this had existed in the data and that is what you're completing. And also know that if this is in data, it will maybe be only once. Very sparse also, and also very infrequent. So let's say maybe tennis class, he wanted to buy his own racket. That's maybe only occurring once or twice. So you are literally stealing this phrase from your training data. So whatever in 4 grams looked like Shakespeare is actually like his 4 grams, right? So you're literally like just copying in some sense. Okay. So these two issues clear. So these are some of the issues to keep in mind, because we will return to some of these issues and we will show how neural models are better at handling these kinds of situations later. Okay. So by the way, you don't have to necessarily limit yourself to words. Nobody is stopping you to do that. You can build a language model where the base constituent is a character. So you can say, instead of me modeling a probability of a sequence of words, I'm going to model a sequence of characters. So I'm going to say probability of S, U, R, and so on, all the way till H. And you can model this, right? So you can develop, let's say, a model of how Indian first names are written. And as you can see, there is a lot of shared patterns, right? Like there's a lot of patterns in Indian names. Like because of maybe religious connotations, a lot of names end with ESH. Like Suresh, Mahesh, like Manish, Manisha. A lot of the context is very, very similar. So you can say that, like, if I have observed probability of H given I and S is going to be very, very high, probably the highest among all the characters, right? So you can build a model for Indian names. You can potentially build a startup, a company, a website, sell this to parents who are looking for baby names, generate new names for them. So all this is like, just by looking at data, you can mine patterns and like model some phenomena, like what makes a name an Indian name. Okay. So let's look at evaluation. We talked very roughly about, okay, we will experiment and see which one works, what is the accuracy. Like, what does it even mean to say what is the accuracy of a language model? Language model is just supposed to give you probabilities of sequences, right? What does it even mean to say that this language model is better than that language model? Right? So one idea here is that models should assign higher probability to real text. So the text that was, let's say, written by fellow human beings should get a higher probability compared to, let's say, gibberish text. So that could be one yardstick of evaluating the quality of language models. So there is this formula called perplexity, which is a very simple formula. It is the nth root of the probability. So you can write this as probability of W1, Wn, and like you take the square root, think of this as the nth root, right? So this is the formula essentially. And you will only compute perplexity on real human sequences and hope that a good language model will assign a higher probability to real sequences. So if this value is higher, and since it's in the denominator, lower perplexity is better, right? So this is one of those rare metrics where lower is better. Generally higher is better, but for perplexity, lower is better. Why nth root? Because we want to also normalize by the length of the sequence. By definition, like anything that comes after this is going to have a lower probability than this is itself, right? Even though just saying this is in human text by itself is very unlikely. You will never say a sentence that says this is, right? You will probably say something after that too, right? So you want to normalize for length of the sequence, which is why there is an n term here. So it's like nth root. One, I think, other interesting interpretation of perplexity is that imagine every word was about as equally likely to come. Let's say you forgot to write your probability formulas and all the probabilities of all the words are uniform. So every word is 1 upon V likely to come, okay? In that case, this formula will become 1 upon V power n. If you take the square root of, if you take the nth root, it will become 1 over V. So the perplexity will become V in that case. So for a terrible model with just uniform probabilities of every single word, so this is a model where the word rabbit occurs about the same number of times as the word the. So clearly a stupid model will have a perplexity of the size vocabulary. And typically our vocabularies are 10,000 to, let's say, 50,000 in practice. So this is the range you should keep in mind. If you are perplexed, if someone tells you that the perplexity of this model is 3,000, like it's a very bad model, all right? And you might have heard of this startup called Perplexity. This is where they're getting the name from, right? This is the perplexity that they are maybe referring to. Yeah.
So are these words going to be independent, like we are assuming?
No. So these words are not going to be independent. This is whatever the model you're using. Every language model is by definition supposed to give you this, which is why we call them a language model. That's their only job. And so if it's a trigram model, it will condition on the last two words. So whatever model you're using, use that model to compute this value and plug it in this formula.
Did we say that the models will use the word with the maximum probability? So when you're predicting a word, let's say after a 3-word phrase, please open the, and if the data has maximum number of times door, will it always say door, or will it in that ratio say it? So
yeah. So great question. You are, I think, thinking about how to generate data. Right here, what I'm saying is, let's pick human data that has already been written and was, let's say, not seen by the model. We want to test this model on unseen data. So let's say we took 80% of all the Wikipedia articles. The remaining 20% of the articles, we compute these probability terms for those sequences. And since it is unseen but still human written, a good model will assign a higher probability to human written text. Right, so that's the only thing we are using to judge the quality of a language model. as per perplexity.
How will the quality be biased? Is it the lambda that you said is what going to bias whether it's a good model or not?
Yeah. So one, like, let's say you want to compare a unigram model versus a bigram model. One thing is you look at the language and maybe it looks like more human-like and you stop there. Or you can quantitatively compute the perplexity of a bigram model and see whether it's actually lower than a unigram model.
That's fine, but how is my model different than yours if we both have the same data?
Yeah, let's say you might, if we have the same data, I might have a transformer based model, you might have an RNN based model, she might have a trigram based model, he might have a bigram based model. Everybody now says my model is the best. And that's actually happening, right? Like OpenAI is saying my model is the best, Anthropic is saying my model is the best. How do we evaluate? So this is like one of many metrics to evaluate. So every paper will at least share what is the perplexity value on a known benchmark. Okay. Question, yeah?
Can you just repeat the last part correctly? You said 80% of the wiki.
Yeah. So great question. So one thing is, if I use all of my data to do the estimation, then I have seen everything already. So it might not be the best test possible. So one typical practice in machine learning research is that you split your data typically in a 70-10-20 ratio called train, validation, test set. And test set is like this final unseen evaluation. So think of this as an exam time. If you do well on that, that's like a good, that's like the yardstick of bragging rights, right? Sorry.
Could we actually overfit these models?
Yeah, so you can overfit these models on the train. So okay, so that's a really good question. So for the models that we are trying so far, unigram, bigram, trigram, there is little chance of overfitting. The only overfitting that can happen is if you have a very high n-gram model and that's just memorizing those sequences and can only produce exactly those sequences and nothing else, then we can say that maybe they are overfitting in that sense. But there are honestly not many knobs to play around to really say that I have just memorized this data end to end, and that's how I am overfitting to this data, and come a new data set I will not be able to do anything, right? So those concerns are a bit muted here, but when we go to like more powerful neural models, those concerns will become prominent. Yeah.
But in the language model, typically the text is not too much of sparse. So here there is in a overfit when we say it's a repeated way, that's when my model will do a bias. So in a language, when most of the text is kind of a side, as we already discussed. So obviously it makes sense that model will try to do overfitting, no? Because 80% of the text is kind of repeated.
Yeah, I mean, I think so it'll take me a lot more time to really go into the issues of overfitting, underfitting, and they are not super important for n-gram models. Maybe we can take it offline. Yeah, okay. So as I was saying, the perplexity of a uniform model that is a unigram model is V, which we just computed. And if you were to just look at the Wall Street Journal, this is the perplexity a unigram model gets, this is the perplexity of a bigram model, and this is the perplexity of a trigram model. And remember that lower is better, so trigram models are better than bigrams, which are better than unigrams, right? Okay. So overall, for the first lecture, which I was supposed to conclude by 12, we wanted to just cover n-gram models, understand how their probabilities are written, how their parameters are estimated, what are the sparsity issues, and how you can balance those by interpolating between unigrams to 4 grams. Let's say if you are working with 1 to 4 grams. I also briefly mentioned that they can be applied at a character level, and we briefly touched upon evaluation, and I discussed perplexity as one of the measures, right? So any questions here before I like jump into the second lecture of the day?
What would be the perplexity of a text which is written by
Written by a human. So all of this is like you're, so all of this is computing perplexity on text written by humans.
Suppose say in a paragraph, if I go on taking the 3 words and compute complexity not by any grammar.
Yeah, so you're saying, let's say I use a person as a language model, right? So what is the human baseline? That's an interesting question, but a very impractical setup. I can't, let's say, ask maybe a student like Kinshuk to say, I'm going to give you sequences, you give me probabilities. That is just like not a human thing, right? Like people don't give you probabilities, they can give you like coherent text.
No, what if like we ask some 10 or 15 of them to write something on this topic or some using these
Yeah.
and then based on the responses that they give, and I compute the perplexity of the
Yeah, you can, so again to remember, you can compute perplexity of a language model on human written text or student written text. Students or humans are not language models. They cannot give you probabilities, or even if they claim to give you probabilities, they are going to be quite bad. And so it makes very, like that's why people don't compute probabilities of humans. Like maybe the best thing you can expect here is, let's say 1. So every sequence gets a perfect probability. In that case, the perplexity will be 1, right? So if you want to think of a really lower bound, think 1, right?
Here, why are we emphasizing on human text? I mean,
Yeah, good question.
generated text.
So I think we started with this idea that language models are supposed to give out probabilities to texts, higher probabilities to texts that were written by people. So we are kind of like, just by that definition, assuming that there's something special about human written communication, human written text. Of course, like if you are a Reddit user, you might not believe me, but whatever, right? Yeah, like I mean, we started from there. We want to say that human written text is gold standard. We want to build a model that maximizes that probability. Question, yeah?
Was it used? Were these N-gram models used in any?
Yeah. So basically, Google search autocomplete. So when you type Prime Minister Modi visit in, and you know where the Prime Minister is, right, by auto completion, right? So that model right now in Google is a transformer based model, but 2 decades ago in 2005 it was an n-gram based model. So we are slowly catching up. There's 2 decades of work to be done, but we are getting there, right?
Is there an end beyond which the value perplexity starts to go down, or like will it always continue?
So it can go down, as I was saying, like if it assigns a perfect probability of 1 to all the sequences.
No, I meant go up. So with n increasing, will the perplexity?
Yeah, it can go up also. Yes. So it's not like it's always a decreasing curve. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you test on training data itself,
Yeah.
it will be very close to 1.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you test on training data, it might happen that there might be 2 possible completions. Like let's say you are both interested in playing football and cricket. So you have multiple essays written where you have said things like, today I played football, today I played cricket. And now the model can only assign 1 probability. Like if you're saying this model will give me a perfect probability of 1, then either it can say I played football today or I played cricket today. It cannot say both with a probability of 1, right? So if like,
It will be
so
lead to 1.
it can be close to 1, yes. Yeah. Like, but generally language, because of its flexibility, has multiple possible completions. You will never actually hit 1.